Welcome everyone to our BCSWomen Taster session today. We are joined today, I'm pleased to say, by Satpal Singh, who is the chair of BCS Agile Methods Specialist Interest Group, and we look forward to hearing what he has to tell us about future careers or careers in Agile. So over to you, Sat.
Andrea, appreciate that. Thanks everyone for joining. Very warm welcome to you. Delighted to be here today, and yeah, I recently enjoyed a great conversation with Andrea, so very pleased we're doing this collaboration with the BCSWomen group. I'm just going to bring up my slides and then we will make a start.
I should say, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat as well.
Yes, yes. I can't see the chat at the moment.
I can, and I will let you know if we've got questions.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. So what I was going to propose to do was work through it. It's quite a big deck, but as I was saying to Andrea at the start, I've done that deliberately because I'm going to send it back so it can be distributed and it can act as a bit of a reference point, and you can peruse it and digest it at your leisure after, and there's some reference material at the end that you might want to go on and dig a little bit deeper. But yeah, so just to get us started. So I'm going to kind of present for about 30 minutes, hopefully. I'm not going to go through everything. As I say, it's quite a lot of content, but I've built this pack up from some actual training I've delivered over the course of Q1 this year in the third sector, which has also been various sort of sessions, sort of talks and workshops and introductions to Agile. So I'm kind of pleased to be continuing that theme. And in the BCS Agile Methods group, we have also been doing a lot of our events and sessions and kind of panel discussions, supporting, you know, a lot of folk with introductions in this space, and especially those who are, you know, part of the kind of our own early careers agenda. So a little bit about me quickly. So as Andrea says, I'm the chair of the BCS Agile Methods Specialist Group. I've been in the industry for over 20 years. I know you wouldn't think that to look at me. But I started as a software engineer, so a lot of my background's in technology, and I basically worked from sort of hands-on engineering roles into sort of, you know, tech lead, managerial roles, and then strategic leadership roles, where I've kind of really been operating for the last 12 to 15 years, I would have said. And I'm a chartered fellow of the BCS. In terms of my Agile experience, it's kind of featured most of my working life, actually, which is kind of interesting. Back when I was a software engineer, as I say, I started in 2000, and yeah, I was exposed to something called extreme programming, which is a flavor of Agile. I'm not going to talk about that today or delve in too deeply to some of the frameworks, but I'm going to introduce a lot of concepts and ideas. I am an active Scrum and Kanban practitioner. I'll explain what they both are later. And I guess the other thing just to draw out there is I was part of a specialist group who helped revamp BCS's Agile certificate products and programs. So I was one of the people who helped with the Agile Foundation certificate. So if you were to embark on that and undertake the foundation certificate, you'd probably find and do some questions that I'd authored. So there you go. And I do a lot of conference talks in this space, and I'm actually lucky enough to be invited to Agile 2020 in the summer, so I'll be heading over to the US to deliver a workshop. So a little bit about me. What's the plan for the session today? I'm going to do a little bit of history. I'm not going to dwell on that, but just to set the scene, I'm going to talk a lot about, you know, why does it come to be? Where does it fit in? What are the benefits of these ways of working? Why are they important? I'm going to introduce Scrum and Kanban as methods and frameworks, and I'll explain why I've chosen to do that. Talk a little bit about some of the roles, and then we'll get into the, well, what does it look like in practice, and how might you get started, and what are the sorts of things you might want to think about? And I think that's what I really want to do. I want to paint a bit of a picture today, and then hopefully we should have, you know, 15-20 minutes or so, hopefully more, just to have a bit of a, you know, an open conversation, exploratory conversation. And that's the bit I always like when I do talks. I like to understand what are your, you know, your outstanding questions, and how can I help when we've got time together. So Agile's history, a bit of a potted history. It's been around for quite a while now. It had its 21st birthday earlier this year. I was part of a team who helped create a global festival which celebrated its 20th anniversary last year, so that was quite a huge undertaking. So really, it's kind of come about. So if you think about back to the 90s with the rise of the personal computer and more applications getting built, etc. So, you know, technology really started to kind of take off. We already had the internet. We started to have the World Wide Web. That was all happening when I was kind of a student, really, all those days ago. But really, software projects were failing before that, you know. So the software crisis, I think that term was coined in the late 60s, you know, in the early 70s. And really, I think what had been identified was there was a need to change the way that we worked to actually have more successful delivery. That's really what this was about. It had gone on for some time, you know, lots of money was being kind of wasted, budgets were kind of being spent with very little value at the other end of it. And sometimes IT projects would go on for years. And really then in 2001, 17 sort of, you know, evangelists, visionaries, whatever term you prefer, came together at a snow resort, no less, and co-created something that we call the Agile manifesto, and that continues to have, you know, huge impact on the industry, and is really where a lot of this stuff came from. And I'm going to share some links later. So that's really kind of where Agile kind of came in. So it's been around for quite some time now. It's very short history for you there. So where does it really fit in? Because what these guys were doing when they came together was they were trying to overcome the challenges, the problems that they'd seen and faced in industry. They had lots of trouble delivering software successfully and actually delivering value to their customers and meeting the customers' needs. And there was a need to change that and improve that. The reason a lot of that came about was because there was lots of frustrations with traditional methods and ways that projects were being delivered. Now, a lot of that was because typically, you know, we created plans, and plans become, you know, they're quite static at a point in time. And, you know, if you're going to create a plan and, you know, work through it, you're kind of often going on the basis that things aren't going to change. And that's not really the reality. You know, plans are okay, but they go out of date pretty fast, as I just mentioned. And planning's a good thing, but plans, yeah, they kind of fall out of date fast. And traditionally, we worked in a more sequential manner. You know, we did things in phases, and it would often take a long time before things were put in front of our end users and customers. And those were challenges that created all the problems that I just talked about. You might have seen this. This is the iron triangle. So really the whole point of this is, you know, you've got these three different dimensions that are key to projects. And, you know, we still often talk about these things. You've probably experienced this in your own work. So, you know, you've got the idea of, you know, this time, it's usually fixed time frames, is usually dates. Sadly, sometimes they're arbitrary. Hopefully they're not. They're, you know, they're driven by some real need out in industry. And budget, right? Budget is a natural constraint. None of us have bottomless pits of cash, right? So the only variable we then typically have to play with is scope. You know, what are we actually going to be able to do? Have sensible, meaningful, valuable conversations about what that looks like. And that's really where Agile kind of helps. And ultimately, we want to deliver quality. We want to deliver value to, you know, our end customers. You know, those that we're trying to serve the needs of. So where Agile is beneficial, if you think about all the things I've just talked about, the challenges we've seen in the past, is that, you know, we now accepting and acknowledge very readily in the world of work that things are vague. You know, there's a lot of lack of clarity when we come into projects often. We don't know, there's lots of unknowns. There tends to be a lot of complexity in the environments that many of us work within. Things change constantly, you know, change is the only constant, as we often say, and that's the reality of the world that we live and breathe. And I've already mentioned the two constraints. You know, budget is often one, and time is often one. So we've got to work with these. And you've probably heard the term VUCA. You know, we live in a VUCA world. So there's a lot of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the whole point of Agile is we try to find ways to kind of work with all of that in a meaningful fashion. So I like this visual a lot, because what we're talking about here is the fact, as I've mentioned, you know, the traditional ways of working versus Agile. So if you look at the bottom left there, Agile's not always the answer, right? So if you're in an environment where things are very clear and everything's known up front, you can work in traditional ways. And, you know, your environment is what we would class as simple. You wouldn't need Agile ways of working. You could just create a plan and the teams could follow it, and you get to the end and you deliver what you're hoping to achieve. That isn't often the reality that most of us face. So then we move into more complicated sort of scenarios and environments. And then we get into complex, which is what we're going to touch on later. And sadly, some of us face environments which are nothing short of chaotic, where things are really unknown. Nobody seems to have any clarity. Things are unclear. And frankly, it can be a very difficult environment to work within. But there are agile methods and ways that can support you if you're in that kind of environment. So this is always nice as well, because it kind of shows really what the difference is between, you know, those traditional ways of working that I touched on earlier versus, you know, underneath that timeline, what it means to kind of work in agile ways. So in traditional ways, as I mentioned, you know, you work in a more of a sequential path. And if you look at the risk there, you're not really being able to kind of manage the risk and think about the risk until you first release something, right? But in traditional ways of working, you release quite late. And what we're actually been advocating for and what we've moved to in agile ways of working is releasing in shorter cycles, more regular. So you can see the difference there in the visual underneath, where, you know, we're working in small iterative fashion, we've got small little cycles. And as you can see there from the release visual, we're kind of releasing more regularly. And the value of that is by doing so, we're getting things in front of our customers more readily and quicker. And actually we're de-risking. So we're actually able to manage risk, because if you put something in front of them, you're likely to probably establish that it might not be what they're looking for. So therefore you can correct course. And we're going to be talking a lot about those sorts of ideas. Before I move on, because I can't see if there's any questions or what's in the chat, anything, Andrea, you want to pick up quickly before I move on?
No questions at the moment. So.
That's it. So it's always good to talk about what it is and what it isn't, because sometimes there can be a lot of confusion in this area. And there are lots of myths that we often like to dispel. So what isn't it? Just very, very quickly. Oh, somebody's raised a hand, I think.
Yeah, Anita's raised a hand. Let me just allow her to talk.
Okay.
Anita, you should be able to talk now.
I'm mute. Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, you know, one of the previous slides where you, so I'll give you a little bit of background. I mean, I came back to the industry after a long break, and I was so looking forward to get onto an agile project. And unfortunately, it's not very agile right now. I was looking at one of your previous slides where you talked about the complexity of yes. So why do you say Scrum for complex and Waterfall Agile for complicated? I thought Scrum is to do with Agile, isn't it?
Scrum's an agile framework. So I am gonna go and talk a little bit more about Scrum. So if you're happy to hold that question, I will answer it shortly, and then we can explore it in the Q&A. Because all I'm trying to say is there are different environments now. If you look at this visual here, the whole point of it is simply saying that in certain environments, you know, we move across a scale of things that we know and are clear to us. And as you go, if you're in an environment where things are less clear, you need ways of working where you're building up and shaping a picture as time goes on. We often talk about this idea around emergence. And frameworks like Scrum's a framework, that's technically what it's deemed. It works best in the complex world where there are uncertainties and you're able to create the framework and environment to enable things to emerge over time. But I am going to go and explain that a little bit more. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but I will come back to that if that's okay.
Thank you.
So yeah, so what is it, what isn't it? Just quickly, because we've got quite a lot to get through. So just things that come up quite a lot in conversations and when we're training and coaching and teaching this stuff. So it's very important to point out that Agile is not the answer to everything, right? It's not a silver bullet, it's not a panacea. Sometimes, you know, it's positioned that way, and sometimes it can get bad rap because of that. It's absolutely not the case. It's also not really about you going faster. You know, if you create good Agile environments and a business can truly be Agile, they will see greater agility. And we talk a lot about agility. In fact, during the week, one of my fellow committee members did do a talk that we hosted at the Agile Methods, which was an introduction to agility. So once that recording is available, I can share it with Andrea in this group, and you might get some value out of that. But it's not really about going faster, and I'm going to explain that later. And it's definitely also not about not planning, and I'm going to talk about some of the original values and principles shortly, because there was this view that, oh, you know, Agile doesn't care about plans. Yeah, it doesn't care about plans because plans don't work, they go out of date, but it cares about planning. It's not about avoiding planning, it's about doing planning in a different way. And also, again, documentation. It isn't about avoiding that, because sometimes you hear stories like, oh, well, we don't do documentation in Agile like you do in traditional methods of Prince 2. I was once a Prince 2 person too. That isn't the case. Again, what we do is we attach value to other things more so than documentation. And we don't ignore risk. You know, we don't have risk registers as such in lots of Agile ways of working, but we definitely are interested in risk. In fact, we pay a lot of attention to risk and in Agile ways of working, and we're able to tackle it more readily in a more frequent fashion. And you kind of saw a bit of that in the previous slide that I had, where I had the two visuals showing you the difference between a traditional waterfall method and Agile ways of working. And lastly, it doesn't guarantee delivery. It takes a lot of work and practice, but you can get started very, very quickly. And it's all about creating the right environment, which I'm going to go on to talk about shortly. But what is it? So let's just be clear on that. It's actually more about a mindset. It's creating the right mindset and attitude and a set of behaviors that really help you, enable you to be successful when you're delivering. It's a set of tools. So there's a myriad of frameworks and methods out there. And really what we now try to encourage is you pick and choose. You don't have to be wedded to one particular way of working. And sometimes, sadly, you know, consultants will come along and sell something into a large organization and some of the larger scale frameworks. That doesn't really bring success, but you can pick and choose based on your own context. And context is very, very important. It's all actually about customer centricity. It's about enabling and supporting your customers and delivering value for them. And that's at the heart of Agile. It's a really, really important idea. And please do hold on to that, because we're going to talk about it later. It's a focus on value. What's valuable? What really matters? And focus around your outcomes. You focus around the outcomes. We talked earlier about dates and budgets. Yes, of course, these things matter to organizations, but you should be putting your customers first, and you should be delivering value to them, and then making sure that you're using your budgets in the best possible way to support them. If you do that, you're going to be a very, very successful team, very, very successful organization, and you can be able to be very impactful in whatever marketplace you operate in. It's about learning quickly. So a lot of this is about doing things in sort of batches and de-risking delivery, as I mentioned earlier. And we sometimes talk about failing fast. I don't particularly like that term, but it is because sometimes, you know, failure is stigmatized, but we shouldn't be afraid of failure. A lot of Agile methods and Agile mindset and behaviors is about embracing that and actually learning from that and being able to learn more quickly. And ultimately, it's about, you know, actually figuring out what you should be doing moving forward and making sensible decisions on what you already know. And when I talk about Scrum shortly, I'm going to bring that idea to life. We're going to be talking about something called empiricism. So this one's an important slide, and I'm not going to dwell on it because it's quite a lot of content. And, you know, sometimes there's courses on this stuff and people have written books on this, and there's lots of blog articles. But these were the original values and principles that the 17 co-authors co-created. And the reason I bring this up now at the end of the section I've just talked about is because I just talked about planning, I talked about risk, I talked about collaboration, I talked about plan. So if you look at the values there, what was originally advocated was, look, there's certain things that we're actually encouraging you value more than other things. So if you look at the second one, for example, working software over comprehensive documentation, what the authors were saying is, it's not that we don't value documentation, we actually value delivering things that work more than that. And if you focus on that, that's going to bring more success. And if you look at the final one of the 4 values, responding to change over following the plan. So when folk ask me, Seth, what does Agile mean to you? What is Agile? I typically say Agile is being able to respond effectively to change. And the way these methods and frameworks are set up is that's what they help enable. In traditional ways, you can't often do that as well. And of course, interactions and individuals and interactions. I'm going to talk a lot later about the people aspects, which are key to succeeding here. And then there are the 12 principles in the bottom left there, bottom of that column. Talk about keeping it simple, doing things in small steps. You know, don't overcook it. Don't go for the big bang. This is all about trying small things and being experimental. It's key. Right diagonally in the corner, frequent deliveries. I've already demonstrated that on a visual that I showed in the previous slide. So this is all about just building a picture So to the question that was asked earlier by Anita, this is all about working your way through things, and that's really where methods like Scrum help. Right, so I'm going to take a quick pause there. Any burning questions, Andrea, before I move on?
It wasn't a burning question, but Stephen raised a point about the fact that where he works, when you talk about Agile, people think about it as Agile ways of working as opposed to a methodology. And I said that that's a confusion that quite often happens in organizations. If you're not in the IT side of things, when you talk about Agile, people think it's more about flexible working than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's perfect timing for that comment, because here we are, ways of working. Let's go a little bit deeper. And absolutely, this is what we talk about now. It's creating an environment. So what I want to touch on here. So this I find is quite helpful, and it's worked in some of the coaching and training that I've done earlier this year. So we talked earlier about trying to kind of, look at what you're doing, and really backlogs. The idea of backlogs is, you've got a bunch of things to do. You want to prioritize them. There's lots of uncertainty. So you might recognize like could do, should do, and must do from if you've ever tried to use Moscow, for example. That's probably familiar to some of you on the call. And the whole idea of a backlog, it's really just a to-do list. But what you do is you're trying to prioritize it. And you're prioritizing it in collaboration, because you're trying to understand what are the most important things that you could be doing now as quickly as possible, which are of value to those that you're trying to deliver for. And then when you've had those conversations, and a lot of this is about good communication, good collaboration, you would then be able to say, right, we're going to take that into a sprint. So a sprint is simply the idea of a fixed time period over which you're hoping to achieve a bunch of things that you've agreed are suitable goals, are suitably realistic, they're sensible, and should you achieve them, they're going to bring value. And the reason I've got that, the workflow on the right there, because I'm going to touch on Kanban just to bring it to life for you all. But in simplest terms, you can simply create this idea of a workflow where you've got a bunch of things you want to do. You've got a to-do list, a bunch of things that are in progress that you're working on, and a bunch of things that you've achieved. So even by looking at that, you get a bit of visibility of the status of things, don't you? It makes it real, it brings it to life, and it's very visible. And that's a very, very important concept in Agile. So expanding on some of that further, we were just talking there about ways of working. So creating the right culture is very, very important. And that takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of communication, it takes a lot of buy-in. So the way to do that is to try to bring it to life. What are the likely benefits, and encourage your senior leaders to support you and go on that journey. But a lot of organizations, sadly, do struggle with being able to achieve that. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in the Q&A at the end. On the previous slide there, I showed the sort of visual and the concept of creating a backlog and that workflow in the sprint. A lot of this is also about creating a single source of truth, somewhere where everyone can go at any given point in time and see what's happening. Sometimes in the past, people created plans, as I mentioned, and they get tucked away at the bottom of a drawer. People can access them. They don't really quite know what's going on. And these ways of working, a lot of this is about visibility. It's about transparency. It's about making things visible to everyone, to anyone, whatever their vested interest in, whether they're, customers, the delivery team, stakeholders, product managers, senior stakeholders. They can all see, what's going on because things are visualized. A lot of the way Agile works well is if you create that sort of culture of experimentation. So you're open to learning, you're open to being able to try things, set out a hypothesis, and then say, well, were we able to prove or disprove that, and use that to then determine what you do next. That's something that's advocated a lot in Agile, and I think it's a very, very sensible way to work in the VUCA world that we now live in, as we talked about earlier. And we were talking a moment ago about, ways of working. A lot of this is about creating the right type of team. So a cross-functional team is a concept you'll hear a lot. And it's about bringing together the people who can help you achieve whatever it is you actually want to do, and get the right people together, create a team of the right skill set, and also make sure that they're able to share knowledge and support one another, and reduce your external dependencies is a concept that is often advocated in a lot of Agile methods and ways of working. And it's very, very important, because when you need to go external, that introduces waiting, that introduces dependency, and that's often where you lose agility, and that's often what we teach if you ever go on a Kanban course, for example. As I've said throughout, a lot of this is about ultimately serving the needs of your customers. But you've got to speak to them, you've got to release things often, get them out early, and have that dialogue through the methods and the communication channels that you create. Right, I'm not going to talk about this because it's a very busy visual, but I've included it in the deck so you can go and kind of peruse it in your leisure. It's courtesy of Dandy People, as you see there in the corner. They're an amazing outfit who do lots of great work in the Agile world globally. They're a Scandinavian-based outfit. But a couple of things I'm just going to draw your attention to that are relevant to our conversation. So if you look at the far left there and all the things that they've got there on those visuals, if you think about the why of Agile, we've talked a lot already about the fact that we deal with a lot of unknowns. So they kind of capture that, and think about this idea of faith-driven development. I really like that. You know, you're basically trying to do something and you're just taking this big leap, and you've got this kind of, you know, trajectory you're going on, and you've got a huge amount of risk over a period of time. Contrast that to the visual below that, where, look, we're taking small incremental steps. It's a smaller, more manageable journey where risk can be managed in a simpler, more regular fashion. That's the distinction between traditional ways of working and more agile ways of working, where we're more incremental, as you can see there. And then on the far right, you can see a whole bunch of things that I've also already touched on. Look at the onion at the top there. Look at that, right at the center of it, we've got tools and processes, but they're layered with lots of other things that are of huge importance to enable you to succeed. So the practices, then you've got the actual principles and values that I touched on earlier. And sort of surrounding all of that is this whole idea of being in the right mindset, having the right behaviors, having the right attitude is key to success. But there's a lot of good stuff there, and it brings to life a lot of things we've already talked about.
So
right,
before you go on to, you may cover it in this methods and frameworks, but one of the questions that Karen has raised is, what do you think is the best format or tool to make the backlog visible? You know, in a virtual working environment, you know, in the past, I know that we've had them on the walls, and you stand around the wall and move your backlog items backwards and forwards. Well, hopefully just one way, but sometimes they get blocked. So how do you make them visual? So
yeah, you know, that's a great question. I'm not going to get into I'm going to be talking more about methods and frameworks in the next bit, but it's a brilliant question. And there's lots of tools now. There's lots of technology, and again, technology is a thing that's kind of really supported us over the last 2 years, certainly during the time where we've all been kind of confined to our homes and worked in distributed remote teams, as was mentioned. And, you know, maybe you're using things like Jira, your Confluence, that's Atlassian's tools. They're very popular in the industry. But if you think about the collaborative tools that we now see, you know, your Miros and your Mural boards, and they're all the tools that we're able to use, that we can share with others, and we can co-create backlogs, co-create plans, co-create, you know, just about anything you want. And I think those are the sorts of tools that are gaining prominence because of what we experienced and lived through over the last couple of years. In my personal work and some of the, you know, the events I organise and the other things I'm involved in, my meetup group that I run, we use something called Trello. Very simple tool, easy to use, lots of free features, and it allows me to create a visual backlog, a visual workflow. So there's some of the tools that I use, and I'm happy to explore that in the Q&A session, but hopefully that helps a little bit. So I already talked about this slide earlier, but just bringing it back. The idea here is, as it was asked earlier, we're more in the realms of the complex and the chaotic, where things really are not known. You know, how do you progress? How do you move forward? Well, as we've just been discussing, you move forward in small incremental steps. You take your time. You try to establish what you know now. What do we know? What do we not know? What are the unknowns? And what are the things we probably don't even know? You know, so, you know, there are lots of unknown unknowns, right? So this is really what we're trying to do. We're trying to build up a picture over time and allow things to emerge. That's really where Scrum comes in. So welcome, Scrum. So the reason I'm introducing Scrum, I could have picked lots of other frameworks, because I'm a Scrum practitioner, amongst other things. But Scrum is the most widely used Agile framework in the world. And it helps me bring to life some of the concepts that we've already talked about. I'm not going to get into lots of detail because, you know, you could go on a Scrum course and they last several days. You know, I've been on a few, and you know, you'll get into the depths. But we don't need to cover that in this introductory session. But I have included some reference links at the end of the deck that you can go and peruse at your leisure. But think about what we've already been talking about. So we talked about the backlog, that to-do list of prioritized work, things that are going to be of value. The team will then pick that up. So Agile is a pull system. It's all about empowerment and ownership. The team saying, oh, we can do these things, right? We'll bring that into the next iteration. That might run for a period of time. 10 days, 2 weeks is quite typical for sprint cycles for teams. And they work through that in an iterative fashion. But some interesting things to call out. The team meet daily in a stand-up, in a daily scrum. That gives them every day an opportunity to get together, to have conversations and to understand where their challenges are. And that's a way to de-risk. We talked about earlier. That's a way to open up the conversation and then get others in the team to go away and take those challenges and those impediments, we often call them in the Agile world, to the relevant people and get them unblocked. But because you're meeting daily, you've got a 24-hour period in which to continue to improve and make sure that you stay on course and achieve whatever goals you set out over the course of a sprint. At the end of that, we often talk about this idea of an increment. You've got something that's a tangible deliverable that you can release to your customers. And internally, you would often have a review where you showcase that. You would talk about what's been achieved, what did we learn. These are all incredibly powerful concepts that if we embrace them well, we can be very, very successful in our deliveries. And then you go through it all again through an iterative cycle. But the whole point is you're continuing to learn on a constant basis. Agile is all about continuous improvement and continuous delivery and getting things released regularly. That's why I'm kind of introducing Scrum very, very deliberately. And to the earlier question, we talked about complex. That's where Scrum operates, in the complex world where things are quite difficult. We might have some complex deliverables and we really don't know everything up front. So we build up over time. And as more time passes, we learn more, don't we? And as we learn more, things become a little bit more predictable. So we start to reduce the unpredictability of things. So very, very importantly in this type of session, there are a bunch of roles that are advocated by Scrum. Other frameworks have other ones. To be honest, it doesn't really matter what they're called. But the point is you're going to have a development team. So on the right there, a group of people, a cross-functional team, folk who are coming together, who are the right people to get the job done. And that should be a team who are empowered and they organize themselves around a key goal. And the goal is set by those who are driving the vision. And that's often on the other side, people like a product owner. You know, in these ways of working, we work in a much more product-centric way. And that takes us more towards, you know, a focus on the customer, a focus on features, a focus on valuable outcomes. And at the middle of all of that, you tend to have those who are very well versed on getting the best out of the methods and the tools and the frameworks. In Scrum's world, that's something called a Scrum Master. And I'm sure you'll see lots of jobs advertised. It's very important to point out that a Scrum Master is a coach and a facilitator. They're someone who's trying to help the team get the best out of Scrum as a way of working and support the product owner to realize their vision. It's the product owner who holds the vision for the product, will then interface with external, internal stakeholders, will often have channels through which they can reach customers and get feedback. But the whole point of all of this is it's all of these roles that come together and they collectively are the Scrum team. You need to have people in these roles. They need to understand their roles and responsibilities and they have to collaborate effectively to enable success. That's very, very important. And the Scrum Master kind of sits as the glue between the product side, which is more of the external customer side, and the team. Well, let's explore that a little bit more. So the values piece is important. So we talked earlier about the original values of the Agile manifesto, but each of these frameworks and methods often have their own. And I'm a big fan of Scrums because I think they apply more broadly than just working within this type of framework. I think they apply in the workplace. I think they can apply in life. And this is often how I use them, which is why I was keen to kind of position it in this way. If you think about, you know, being courageous, being open to challenges, sharing them, raising them, making sure that people are aware of them, rather than being buried away in risk registers, etc. To achieve things, we have to focus. We have to shut out the distractions. We have to be very focused on the goals and what we're trying to achieve. The team are always committed to one another, committed to what they're trying to do. There's a lot of respect between the different, you know, roles that exist within a team, who's performing what responsibilities. At the end of the day, most of what we all do is a team sport. I think Andrea said it right at the start. we don't succeed alone. We're often part of a bigger picture, part of a bigger story. We're all contributors to something, and a lot of these ways of working, they help bring that to life. And it's crucial for openness. Openness is key to success. If we're not transparent, we talked about it earlier, things get missed. People don't have all the facts, therefore they can't make well-informed decisions. And just in summary, Scrum is a framework. It's a lightweight framework. But success is all about creating that vision, which is done by product people, having a set of goals. We understand the why, we understand the what. The team can then build up the what over time. And the team are empowered to focus on how they achieve the goals. And that's crucial because a lot of this is about empowerment. It's about a pull system, about them actually taking on what they can and being realistic and forecasting what they can do rather than having work pushed upon them and dictated to them. That's usually where often projects fail because unrealistic expectations are set. And I talked earlier about transparency. Alongside that, other pillars are inspection, adaptation. You're constantly inspecting what you're doing and you're adapting if things are not as they should be. And that's all basically underpinned by this idea of empiricism. So this is, what do we know? Let's do things based on what we already know to be true. Let's make informed decisions. That's what empiricism is. And Scrum is basically based on empirical control methods. And lastly, I've already said this throughout this session because it's key to all of this, is be driven by outcomes. Try to create the right outcomes for your customers. Happy customers is really what Agile was all about, because way back in the past, when large projects were failing and budgets were being squandered, they were not delivering value to the customers in a timely fashion. And that's why we've moved these ways of working and living the values. Whenever I'm coaching teams, my own teams in my organization, I often come back to the values and like to make sure that the teams are embracing the values. Right, we're nearly getting to the end and then we'll have a chat. Any questions, Andrea?
There are a couple of questions. The first one's from Joanna, and she's asking, is there space for a business analyst in the Scrum roles?
Great question. This came up recently. In fact, there were a number of other sessions done. In fact, Sohair had arranged one. I don't know if you remember that one, Andrea. So yeah. Yes, there absolutely is. I think the way business analysts work in Agile teams changing as it would do. And I think there's a misconception that there's no longer a role for business analysts. That simply isn't the case. Because in my own team, we have business analysts, and it's really about benefiting and using the skill set of a business analyst. What do business analysts do? Well, they often help you knock the requirements into shape. So they would help create stories. They would help focus on what are the acceptance criteria. They would be a key point of engagement with your end customers and who you're trying to serve and supporting and enabling that dialogue. So yes, there is absolutely a role for business analysts in these types of teams.
Yeah, and there are two questions which are linked, and it often comes up in the workplace is sort of what is the difference between a project manager and a Scrum master, and how does a project manager fit into Scrum? So and I know that the skill sets are similar, but they're not identical, and and that's where people think that well, we've created Scrum teams, so we'll just put a project manager in, and it doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't, and it's a very important question. I'm glad it's been asked, because so if you think about the slide I had earlier when I talked about moving from a project type environment to a product environment, if you looked at the slide where I talked about the Scrum roles, did you see the concept of a project manager? Did I mention a project manager? No, because in a lot of Agile ways of working and methods, and certainly Scrum, there is no concept of a Scrum master. We have a team who are delivering, we have customers whose needs we're trying to meet, and the team are empowered to deliver that. Sure, there are likely to be project managers and program people, within your organizations, and there's probably a PMO doing lots of reporting, but there's a very big difference between a project manager working in traditional ways, focused on budgets, focused on delivery, focused on timescales and budgets, all the things we talked about early on, versus the role of a Scrum Master, who's most definitely not a project manager. A Scrum Master is a coach, is a facilitator, someone who is able to help enable the team. And their focus is never delivery, their focus is value and timely release of enhancements to products. So it is a shift in mindset, and I do work with colleagues who've shifted from PMO sort of world into the Agile world. And there is a difference. There is a real shift in the thinking, and that's why I talked earlier about the importance of the mindset being right and getting into the right mindset and building the right mindset. Because there is no real concept of project managers in true Agile ways of working, and there's lots of reasons for that.
And the other part for me is that as a Scrum Master, you may have more than one role in the Scrum team. So the Scrum Master role may actually move around. So one time it may be a developer that runs it for a couple of sprints because it's actually more relevant because it's a development phase, or it may be the testers that get involved. So a Scrum Master isn't just about one. It's not just tied to one role either. I think that's the important part to note.
So the Scrum Master is a role, and somebody should be performing that role. And where I think you see this stuff fail is where somebody's only doing it like part-time, or that, as you say, if it moves around. I've seen that, but that doesn't really work because everybody has a kind of key role to play. So your specialists, those who are part of the the team who are delivering, everybody has to be allowed to perform their role, and a lot of this is about playing to people's strengths as well. So for example, one of the other great anti-patterns of Scrum is the absent product owner. So if you don't have someone who's actually focused on sort of deriving the product sort of roadmap and working and engaging with stakeholders to understand what we're really trying to do here, what is going to be of value, you start to suffer and things don't work as well. And it's never really the fact that the methods and frameworks don't work, it's the adoption that's not quite right. But also the key thing here is you've got to be open to continue learning, and that's what I'm going to be closing with. So it's okay, I'm going to move on because I think we're starting to run a little bit out of time, but we took some questions along the way, so I think that's been quite good. So Kanban, I'm only touching on it because I did talk about workflows earlier. So again, another very prominent method in the Agile world, and Kanban is much more a method. And this really came in because it was used heavily in things like the sort of car manufacturing production lines, as you can see there in the visual. And Toyota were one of the great pioneers of this. But the point was, when something went wrong, they would stop the entire production line and everybody would focus on fixing the problem, and then they continue to get on. And that's kind of translated on into the way we work. So you'll often see lots of people using workflow. So I use workflow. I sometimes set up a Kanban board, my whiteboard behind me, and I'll have different stages that I might move through. And again, it's to visualize things, it's to let me see how things are flowing, and it helps me see where the bottlenecks are, where things have stopped, why have they stopped. And part of Kanban is to stop you doing too much. It's about saying, what's the most valuable stuff? Let's focus on that, and let's reduce the amount of waiting time. So practices, again, don't really have time to get into them, but it'll be in the deck that we'll share. Visualizing work is really important. You can see some of the other important aspects here that are key, and they actually support. So you can bring frameworks and methods together, which has also been in the past a bit of a misconception. So, Scrum and Kanban, they play well together. So you can use the best of both to help you do what you're trying to do, but do it within the context of your organization, what best serves your needs. Right, we're getting to the end now. Just very, very quickly, doing versus being. So we've talked a lot about some of the methods, the frameworks, some of the early ideas, why these things were important. Doing is all about getting those basics in place, but success doesn't come from just mechanically doing. So if you do Scrum and you set up some stand-ups, and you do a retrospective, and you've got a backlog, that doesn't necessarily make you agile, and it doesn't mean you're agile. Unless you're releasing things out quickly to your customers and you've got good feedback and you're collaborating well and you're committed to continuous improvement, you're not really truly getting there, and you need to continue to go. On the right there, on the being agile, I'm only going to talk about the very last item in that list because that's at the heart of a lot of this. This whole appetite for continuous learning and improvement is key. And if you're embracing that, you're absolutely going to be successful in these ways of working, and you really get it. But those are behaviors. And if you have them on an individual level, you can bring them to a team, right? So getting started, which is kind of partly what Andrea and I had agreed we were going to be talking about today. So what I want to close with quickly, some questions just to ask yourselves. Think about all the things I've talked about as to why Agile became a thing. Where did it come from? What challenges and problems were we trying to solve? Where do you see that sort of thing in your own organization? Think about the values I talked about earlier, the behaviors. What are your own strengths? What are your own behaviors? Do they align with the Agile values? Which ones are strengths for you? Which ones perhaps are lesser strengths? Which things would you like to improve? Do you see and understand the importance of kind of, breaking down delivery and making sure that, you're validating your assumptions? A lot of Agile is about that. How do you de-risk delivery now? These are ways that you could do that. Have you continued to see projects go on where you haven't really met your customers' expectations, or you didn't manage to deliver what you were hoping to? Why was that? Perhaps you overcommitted. Perhaps the team didn't collaborate effectively. Perhaps you couldn't get access to the stakeholders who were there to, unlock, the challenges or answer the questions you needed to get answered. All these things are key considerations. If you're doing these things now, you can really embrace Agile ways of working. Are you committed to your customers? I'm sure you are. Would you like to be more committed? There's lots of Agile ways of working which can help you. And really importantly, which is why I've left it to the end, where do you stand on change? Do you fear it or do you embrace it? If you can embrace it and you're happy to embrace it. I often say I'm someone who's kind of comfortable being uncomfortable. If you've ever heard a phrase like that. And I find it very easy to kind of think and work in this way, which is why I'm a huge fan and advocate of Agile ways of working, but not everybody's necessarily kind of wired that way, so to speak. So a few things there to think about on a human level. And in the simplest terms, a lot of us often say Agile is really about common sense, but can you introduce it and make it work in your organization? It's about communication. Communication, effective communication at all levels. It's about making that shift from a focus on budgets and dates to outcomes. Focus on what you're trying to achieve. Are you meeting the right outcome? You've probably heard me use the term outcome quite a lot in this session, very deliberate. And value, making sure that you're delivering value. The tools and processes help, as was asked earlier, but those are not the focal point. Those have helped. Those are the enablers. So whatever tools you're using, great, fantastic. I'm sure they're the right tools. But getting the best of them is embracing the values and the behaviors and creating the environment for success and using the tools to succeed. Ultimately, Agile is about people, whether that be the teams, the customers, the stakeholders. It is all about people and serving and meeting people's needs. Scrum Masters are what we call servant leaders as an Agile coaches. And it is really all about that, embracing that service to others and being able to help others achieve what they want to achieve. As I said earlier, it's a team sport. And a lot of this stuff is a human-centered way. Agile ways of working are trying to humanize the workplace. So a lot of the values that I talked about, and there are others across the other frameworks. Kanban itself has its own values. I didn't talk about them today. I think there's 8 or 9 of them. But these things if you think about these things, honesty, respect, courage, collaboration, agreement, building common consensus, balance, striking a balance, not overcommitting to things. We talk a lot more about self-care now, the way we commit, not doing too much, not taking on too much. These things are all very, very important concepts, not just in work, not in project delivery, but in life. And I think you could be successful, in Agile ways of working, in an Agile career, if you kind of truly embrace a lot of these ideas. And Agile isn't just about software delivery anymore. It's gone way beyond that. It has been quite some years. People are using Agile to achieve all sorts of things. And I taught my kids it some years ago, and we had a Kanban board up in our kitchen, and we used it to kind of try to prioritize, things that we should all be doing as a family, so people can use it in all sorts of ways. So yeah, if these ideas resonate with you, then I'd say an Agile career is absolutely for you, and you have so much to bring to it. And I think that's the end. Some references there for you all. Some introductory videos, they're very helpful. They bring some of these ideas to life. Obviously, it would be remiss of me not to include the content that's on the BCS site. Some of it I've contributed to, so there's some nice learning paths there, and also the certification programs, lots of other resources on Scrum.org, which is a leading certification body in the world of Agile. And yeah, I'd say to get started, think about a lot of the things that I've tabled today, the ideas, the behaviors, the human nature of it. If you're embracing these things, yeah, you can absolutely be successful. And think about how some of what you're doing now could translate into Agile teams. That's the sort of thing you want to bring to the workplace. And you don't need to spend lots of money on expensive courses and certifications like I've done over the years. It's not necessary to get you started. Think about the things that we've explored today. Questions? And just some bits at the end there. Sorry, just if you want to stay in touch, you're welcome to LinkedIn with me.
Thanks a lot. A great overview of Agile methods, and I know other people who have used Kanban boards and things to help their kids prioritize their homework and their chores around the house. So it does come in useful, not just for technology. We've got a couple of questions, and I think one is about how can Agile help where there's a resistance to change among teams or managers. That's from Clouds.
Kind of missed the bit.
So how can Agile help with resistance to change? You know, whether it's amongst the team or whether it's with management and things like that.
No, that's a brilliant question. So I talked earlier about experimentation. I didn't go into huge depth, but a lot of what we now try to do is create. So we talk a lot about innovation, right? It's organized, we want to be innovative. Okay, the way to be innovative is to create a culture of experimentation. And what I talked about earlier with Agile ways of working is try to create small experiments. So if you want to overcome resistance or the naysayers or skepticism, and it exists, sometimes, understandably, because they haven't seen the benefits for themselves, try to create small manageable experiments, and then, conduct those experiments, create a clear hypothesis and use that to demonstrate value. And by doing a small experiment, it's at low risk, it's at low cost. And that's really the way to succeed. Never try to do too much at once. And Agile doesn't advocate that, as I've talked about throughout this session. Hopefully that helps.
I think it's one of the things for me with Agile is it stops people what I would call gold plating what they're trying to deliver, because you're looking at what's the minimum viable product that is useful to your user community.
And that's why I talked earlier about releasing value early. That's really what an MVP is about. What is the most valuable thing you could release quickly that's going to be of great value to those that you're trying to deliver for? And you can get into a way of working there, you're going to have a lot of success over time.
Gopi asked, Gopi asked, is it in small Scrum teams, can a Scrum Master also be in the development team and to do the role on a part-time basis? I think you've answered that, but I think it's also.
I think it's, I'd say it's best avoided, because when we try to play dual roles, I think so context switching is a real challenge for a lot of us. And I think to be successful, it's better to have people committed into the roles. And, when I see teams succeeding, and when I'm coaching teams and they're succeeding, it's because roles and responsibilities are clear. And a Scrum Master has to be enabled to perform the Scrum Master role. A product owner has to be present and support the team, interface with the customers and stakeholders, and perform the product owner role. The team also have to be empowered to do what they're best to do. If you start to kind of not do that, you will sadly inevitably run into trouble.
Hassan, I'm going to unmute you. So
hello?
You should, hello. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Thank you. Saad, thank you very much for your presentation. I have a quick question. I just received my diploma course on BCS business analysis. I'm slowly transferring or looking into the Agile and Scrum methodology. I was looking in terms of progressing, in terms of my career, I was looking into the Scrum Master and certified Scrum product owner. From your experience, what advice would you give someone like me in terms of progressing in the Agile environment or looking into developing and mastering the Scrum methodology? So, thank you.
Great question. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I think I've kind of touched on it throughout. Mastery comes with practice. So, I always say that the quest for mastery never ends. It's something I see a lot, and I worked in past teams, and my colleagues used to So there he goes again. But, you know, I think there's a lot of truth in that. It's about going on that continuous journey. So I talked earlier about continuous improvement. If you're open to learning, you're thinking about your strengths, you're thinking about your own self-awareness. You can succeed in this stuff, but you have to be applying it, because I've done a lot of these certifications, I've got a lot of these badges, but until you're applying this stuff, it is of limited value. Now, what's valuable when you're doing these courses? So you talked about some of the product Scrum ones there, and I've done the ones through scrum.org. When you're in an environment with them, you get a lot of value by having conversations. So understanding what other people's challenges are and exploring them together, like we're doing today. You know, there are lots of challenges that organizations face and teams face, trying to get the best out of these ways of working. And the reason they do is because they need to just continue to be practicing. You know, what do we say to our children? You know, I've got 3, mine are a bit older now, but, you know, practice makes perfect. And it applies to us as adults. It applies in the world of work. We have to be committed. Think about the values I talked about earlier. I think the real success from Agile comes from a lot of the things I've talked about today. And I've done it deliberately. You know, I didn't want to get into the weeds on things. I didn't want to talk about things which are much more in the, you know, the kind of, you know, doing it rather than being it. The being it is the key to success, and it's embracing the values, it's behaviors, it's creating the culture. So think about the people aspects I've talked about. Think about how you contribute to that and how you might improve your own journey on that. And the thing is, Agile is very broad, so it kind of, it's not just about, it's such an ubiquitous thing now. It allies with lots of other things. So, you know, a lot of people can move into Agile from other forms of coaching. And I've also done some life coaching in the past, exec mentoring coaching. There's lots of sort of linkages and commonality, but it's all about good communication, good collaboration, commitment to improvement. And I think if you can embrace all of that, you know, you're going to have a successful career in Agile, I'd say.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's dead on time. So well timed there, sir.
That was not by design. That was a complete fluke.
So thank you all for attending today. The recording will be available on the BCS YouTube channel, I would imagine next week sometime, and people will also be sending out, because we, you know, from a GDPR perspective, I can't send out the slides to you, but we will make them available and the BCS will send them out to you. So you'll be getting those in the near future. So